What's up, guys? Welcome back to the Other Guys on the Badlands Podcast Network. I'm Jake Chatsky, joined as always by Paul Kilgallen. The show is on the road again this week. Apologize if my audio quality is less than stellar compared to normal, but we're trying to make it work for you guys because it's the first day of free agency officially. Paul, how you doing?
I'm good, man. This is actually my first week not traveling in about 3 weeks, so I'm very happy to be home. But at least we're in the same time zone this time, so that's good.
Yes.
I can't remember, and I don't know if I'm just like getting older and I'm having memory problems, but I can't remember this much NFL news breaking on a Sunday night before legal tampering ever before. Like,
It's weird.
I don't. I genuinely don't think this has ever happened where we got a flurry of moves on the Sunday night. It's usually around Monday. Monday around noon is when things start happening. And I was like eating dinner last night, and I was like, wait, these teams aren't even allowed to be talking yet. But I think most of them were either guys returning to their previous teams, or in Devante Adams' case, he was outright cut. So I don't think he had to abide by league year. He could just sign whenever he wanted. But yeah, it was a weird night last night. I was not prepared for it to start kind of cascading at that time.
Yeah, Adams was clear. Like Adams didn't have to do anything because he was already released, so he wasn't part of like the free agent class from this year. But all that, like that being said, like Miles Garrett's, I know he was under contract, but like the fact that they just happened to get a deal done right at the 12th hour, Josh Allen's extension yesterday, like it felt
Yep.
like there were a lot of teams setting themselves up for this free agency period in a way that we haven't really seen ever before. So it was definitely interesting.
Yeah, I mean the DK trade last night,
Yep.
which is
We'll get
not
into.
great for us,
Yep.
and we'll talk about why. But yeah, it's a lot of a flurry of information last night for sure.
Well, let's start with the Jets related one. Well, I guess there's two, but one is more Jets related for the future, and that's the Jets re-signed one of their own guys. Jamien Sherwood got himself a new deal, 3 years, 45 million, about 30 million guaranteed. I'll give you a two-part question to start. What do you think of the deal and re-signing one of our own? And what do you think this means for Quincy, who has definitely been vocal about wanting money too, and plays obviously in the backfield with Sherwood.
So Sherwood, to me, I was watching last year, and a lot of times in the Badlands group chat, like Sherwood was taking some bullets occasionally, and I was always kind of like, man, like I don't know if he's that bad. Like he's racking up a lot of stats, and a lot of times that's because the defensive line isn't stopping the run, right? So he's just kind of being a backstop, and he's getting everything that comes through. Um, but I think when you look at like you zoom out a little bit and you try to not stare at some of the bad plays he makes here and there. What you have is a guy who came in drafted as a safety, moved to linebacker, played as a special teamer, had a pretty massive injury, missed some time, came back. And we're 4 years into a career where he completely transformed positions and had to transform his body to do so. And I think we've gotten to a reasonable place with Jamien Sherwood. It's not like we were the only team that wanted to, get him on the roster or pay him some money, right? And so I'm stuck between this like, man, that's a lot of money for Jamie and Sherwood, and is this good to extend a player this young who's 25 years old when we have kind of an aging linebacker core as it is, who is the defensive play caller, who is a culture fit with Glenn. And so like at the end of the day, what I kind of come to is like, it's not my money, right? Like
Yeah.
it's as long as the Jets are being responsible with this money management, like it's not, the dollars aren't coming out of my pocket. So I think I'm okay with it. I will say that I ran a bunch of off-season simulations on a site called PFN where it's actually like a little bit overwhelming because you have to like rework contracts and you have to try to get under the cap. And the first like 10 times I did it, I would run out of cap room after like my first free agent signing. So it gives you a little bit
Tougher
of a
than it looks,
perspective
huh?
on how hard this is. But you could get Sherwood to accept like a 3 for 21 deal on that, right? So I think 3 for 45 with $30 million guaranteed is probably like a little more than the market foresaw. And that's probably why he signed it and said, okay, I'm not even going to bother going to free agency, right? Like I'll take this. This is good money. But it's a major sign of the Jets betting on the continued trajectory of Jamien Sherwood, instead of, like we've seen in the past, you let Demario Davis go to Cleveland and then you bring him back and then he goes to New Orleans and he becomes kind of a stud NFL player. So it's the Jets betting on one of their own for first. If you're keeping track at home, the last four players for the Jets to draft and then sign to a second contract are Sherwood, Michael Carter, Quinnen Williams, Jordan Jenkins,
Oh,
and
wow.
Muhammad Wilkerson, I think. So
Mhm.
that's an interesting mix of players, but the last three are all on the team currently. So if you're talking about like macro trends, we're heading in the right direction. We have three players that are on second contracts that we drafted right now. And that's a good place for a franchise to be. As for Quincy, look, I think we all love Quincy Williams. Been hearing for a while that he might want to rework his contract because the Jets got a hell of a deal the last time they re-signed him. And so when you look at the money here, and we talked about it's not my money, but I hope the Jets are being responsible, you have to wonder if something else is happening, right? Like
Mhm.
if they were willing to commit 30 million guaranteed, 45 over 3 years to Sherwood, does that mean there's some other changes? And I think it's a question about Quincy Williams, but also about CJ Mosley. Do they know CJ Mosley's retiring? Did they know he will restructure? Do they know they're cutting him and he wants to play elsewhere? And is there a potential trade in the works for Quincy Williams to try to get a draft asset out of him, before the contract situation starts to get ugly with him? So I think it is a good signing in the big picture, but to your point, it does raise a lot of questions about the rest of the linebacking group.
Yeah, I think Sherwood, especially this last season, stepped in pretty admirably when CJ went down into like a leadership role in commanding the defense and being that communicator, which, it's nice to see a new regime come in, see a guy who, like you mentioned, was a fifth round pick and say, look at how he's grown. We, as this new regime, are going to set a standard of like honoring our talent that does that. And I think you want to talk about like a new regime affecting culture. That list you just gave of Jets players re-signing contracts, not very long. And that's partly because there were a lot of draft misses, but I think also there were some guys who are deserving of second contracts that like the Jets let go and even let go too early. I'm thinking of like um, a Jason Pinnock type, who this guy like similar situation. Sherwood was drafted for a different position, found his role on a team, and is now being rewarded. Like uh, we want to see more of that, and so I think might have been a bit of an overpay, sure, but it was also like we saw all the tweets about all the other teams finding their diamond in the rough and how Jamien Sherwood was one of the underrated players in this weak free agent class. So honestly, really good on the Jets for striking a deal early and not even letting him get to the market. You're seeing that, with a lot of teams in their offensive line or their key players this free agency. And so I'm glad that the Jets are getting involved.
You know what?
Um,
I want to make a comparison. It's and this is not perfect, but it's something that's close to my heart. So it popped into my brain quickly. It kind of reminds me of the Mets with Pete Alonso this offseason, where if this were the Mets 5 years ago with previous ownership, right? Pete Alonso's not coming back
mhm.
because he's not taking a discount to basically play on a franchise that he's not sure about where it's headed, right? And so if this was 5 years ago, the Mets would have had to pay Pete Alonso. And I'm making the comparison between the two players because they are flawed players that I think a lot of fans love, that kind of came up as unheralded guys who all of a sudden took on a pretty big role. And then you were in a position where you were like, oh my God, if we want to keep this homegrown guy, we're going to kind of have to overpay. The Mets are 5 years down the road into new ownership and where they've established themselves as a good franchise. And so they were able to wait it out and get to the point where Pete Alonso was like, no, I actually do want to come back. My market isn't what I thought it was, and I'll do what I can do to come back. Right. And so, but the Jets are not at that point yet. Right. So it's two franchises operating with kind of similar players in terms of what they mean to the organization. Um, and kind of you see what it looks like when a franchise is not in a good spot versus when they are, right? And so kind of a that's a it's a little bit of a clunky comparison, but that's what popped into my mind.
All right, we got one other. I guess it's a Jets player free agency type news, and that's Devante Adams signing with the Rams on it's 2 years, 46, but it's effectively a 1 year, $20 million deal. The thing that stuck out to me is the Rams have a quarterback, and it's not Aaron Rodgers. What A, what do you think of this, Devontae going to the Rams deal? But more importantly, like, what does this mean in terms of the landscape of like where you can see an Aaron Rodgers ending up? I know he's not, this is a Jets show and neither of these guys are Jets, so we don't have to spend too much time on this, but curious like what your initial thoughts were, because I thought they were going to be a package deal no matter what.
I thought they were too. I think it. My first thought was like, I was like, wow, that's interesting, and it made me think what really happened behind the scenes with Stafford, Rodgers, McVay. Like,